Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And TheTaraReade came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer. And knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers. And knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character. That his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just dragged their feet addressing Tara's allegations until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion. Now cue the faceless comment squad invasion. Cue those fuckers crawling out the woodwork to come analyze the way you wore your hair and what you wear. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow you're the reason for your situation. Somehow they've decided you should bear responsibility for what such monstrous men insist on doing. Somehow they're deluded by the empty, hypocritical, and useless fucking platitudes that bastard keeps on spewing. And I think it's very telling that the best of their excuses when they try to come and justify our president's abuses is a hearty butt Trump. In which case I'll remind you that you never saw the news attempt to sell us Donald Trump like he was morally upstanding or a decent human. But when Joe says something bigoted or ogles someone's little kid, CNN says, isn't this refreshing? Biden's like a mix of JFK and FDR with all the finer parts of Harry Truman. Christ, I know that they don't think that we're the brightest, but at least pretend we got a couple lumens. Ask yourself if you have ever questioned what they fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of three-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Politics of Survival. And we have a great show for you. It's another Friday night for me, Friday morning for some people, and Friday afternoon for most of America. But I have a really special guest who's actually become quite close to my heart. She's been an amazing support and does amazing work for so many humans. And I'll bring her into the show here in a few minutes. But wow, what a week. Another, like every time I come and join you, I'm like, oh, what happens this week? And what did we have happen this week? Well, I guess Joe Biden had another vacation, another beach vacation. I think it's his third one in the last 3 weeks, while of course Maui was burning. And then, but he managed to get some legislation So to try to get that 24 billion, right, that he wants for Ukraine, to get it through. So what's he doing? He's attaching the very minuscule amount that's going to be going to Maui, which is approximately $1.7 million to Maui for relief, which is like $700 per family. I mean, whatever. I saw somebody on Twitter post a thing. Excuse my camera here. Someone posted Twitter on a tweet that said, that guy still owes me $600. That was from the pandemic. Remember, he was making those promises and never came through. Yeah, my camera's acting up. Sorry about that. So, as you know, I'm still in Moscow, Russia. I am waiting for some of my legal stuff to be worked out and my asylum to be final. That should be coming. But here with me today, I have somebody who really understands what it's like to be in foreign prison, to have Interpol notices, to need humanitarian help. She's a person that's very familiar with the media, does a lot of public relations, and does legal work to help people like myself that have gone afoul of their own government for whatever reason, political speech or some other reason. And we're going to talk about some of her prominent cases, including mine, and the wonderful work that she does. So I'm really happy to introduce you to someone who is been unending support to me since I've adventured on this journey when I came to Moscow, Russia, Radha Sterling. Radha, thank you for coming on the show.
Hi, Tara. Thanks for having me on the show. And it's good to spend Friday evening with you.
Yes, it is. And I wanted to start with you just kind of telling us a little bit about you, because your voice, you have the beautiful, lovely British accent with a touch of Australian. So I just want to hear your origin story, if you will, or how and who you are and the profession that you do, what you do.
Yes, certainly. Well, I did grow up in Australia and moved over to Europe when I was around 19 years old. And very soon after that, one of my friends was actually detained in Dubai. And I led the media and legal campaign that facilitated his release. And as a result of that and the media attention that I was able to attract, I got more and more inquiries from people in the same situation who also needed help. And so I thought I would try helping them, and trained up with some local Emirati lawyers and ex-prosecutors and judges, and became quite the expert in the UAE. So since then, we've, as an organization Detained in Dubai, have helped nearly 20,000 people over the past 15 years. As a result of that work with Detained in Dubai, we ended up growing as an organization and not just focusing on Dubai. We expanded into the Middle East to Qatar. And as these countries expanded and started marketing more towards European and American tourists and investors, they also grew. And so did the numbers of people going over there. So we started dealing with Middle Eastern cases, and then eventually expanded to on an as-needed basis. So we've dealt with situations in Asia, in Pakistan, in India, and America, Canada, all over the place. But I think one of the common themes, and one of the reasons that we ended up in communication, is my expertise on Interpol and extradition. And I know Chris Ems introduced you, and he discovered me because his then girlfriend at the time had learned about my Interpol and extradition work from Detained in Dubai. They'd been living in Dubai at the time, and suggested that he contact me. And that was, of course, as you know, when he was detained in Saudi on the request of the United States government, who had an Interpol red notice against him. Now, fortunately, we won that extradition proceeding, and Saudi decided not to extradite him. But right. I think it's this common theme of sort of an overreaching government, a universal jurisdiction. It's about countries trying to export their jurisdiction worldwide, and Interpol is one of those tools that they use to do that. And that's what gets me talking to people like yourself, other Americans facing issues from their own government, or it could be anyone these days. So we're just seeing this pattern of this overreach of power.
Definitely, and a weaponization. And Reef, I wanted to go back to, there was a little clip there of Australia 60 Minutes of Chris Ems. Could you play that and then go ahead and take me off camera so I can fix my camera, and that would help me. So let's play that clip because I want people to hear Chris's voice as well. Thank you.
It's hard to believe how Chris Ems has managed to wedge himself into so much trouble. He's stuck in a no man's land, caught in the middle of a power play between enemies, North Korea and the United States. It started innocently enough when he was invited to the rogue nation for a cryptocurrency conference. A bit of a geek, Chris thought it'd be fun, but the US got wind of his visit and decided there was evil in the adventure. He's now wanted by the FBI, accused of involvement in circumventing international sanctions, and is facing lengthy jail time. The city of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia might be an intriguing place to spend a few days, but Chris Ems's enthusiasm for this city is understandably wearing thin after being stranded here for 6 long months.
Okay, stop it there.
Life must feel pretty...
That's really interesting, Radha. But from my conversations with you, what I learned about Chris's case and with him is that even Saudi Arabia didn't want to hold him for the US. Is that true? Because there just was no crime.
It was that. Saudi actually saw how in the reverse situation, if Saudi were trying to claim someone under the same circumstances as the US was trying to do to Chris, they wouldn't have been allowed to do that by the United States or by any other European country. They saw that it was an abuse of power. And the abuse is that Chris Ems is not a US citizen, has nothing to do with the United States, did not violate any sanctions from his country, the United Kingdom, and didn't commit, essentially, the United States was saying that every foreign citizen needs to learn about US law, study American law, understand American sanctions, and they have to abide by that law, or the US can essentially pluck them from any country in the world and bring them to the United States, even though they've never surrendered to that jurisdiction.
Julian Assange kind of set the precedent for that, didn't he?
Certainly, and obviously that case is still ongoing in the United Kingdom, and there's significant interest in what's going to happen. It's a shame that it's even got this far and such a concern. Julian Assange obviously is a concern for journalism, for free speech, for, in fact, just standing up for your rights as a citizen against, a government committing a wrongdoing. And then you have Chris Ems, who simply visited a cryptocurrency conference, which is obviously his right to do so. He doesn't need to abide by US law any more than any of us do. And I think what's concerning there is you don't even need to be an American citizen. So if they don't like anything that anyone's doing, and it could be right now, it's North Korea who's the enemy, Russia perhaps, and that can extend to China. And people have business dealings in these countries. They have, their own lives, and they don't always consider what America wants at that time. And, American foreign policy can change in an instant. And yet we're all supposed to keep up to date with it and follow it, even if we don't agree with it, even if our own country doesn't agree with that. So to me,
you were in that dramatic moment when the US actually tried to convince Chris to go back to, not to go back, to go to the US, to be extradited to the US and not go back to Great Britain, but to go to the US for possible... Yes.
Do you know what really concerns me? That weaponization, and here's how I see it with the US. Biden actually got together a cryptocurrency task force, and they really wanted to take down the industry because they obviously want to control the economic system, the monetary system. They want to make sure that, people can't make secret transactions. So they really went after a lot of people who were in the industry and took cases against them, criminal cases, indictments against them. Not because they thought they would actually win in court if it got there, but because they know that they can intimidate these criminals into essentially taking a plea deal. And that's what they tried to do with Chris. And this is probably one of the most concerning and applicable issues applicable today. And I'll example that. So with Chris, the FBI actually requested that he enter an arrangement, a plea deal with them, where he would plead guilty to a charge of wire fraud, even though he knew that he had not committed wire fraud.
Oh my goodness.
And he told the FBI that he would be perjuring himself to admit guilt to that charge because he hasn't done that. But he considered it because he was so intimidated by the DOJ, by the power of the FBI, by the misuse of the Interpol Red Notice system. He thought that it's inevitable that he would end up in the United States jurisdiction, that if we look at Assange and the extradition proceedings, either he's going to be in jail pending extradition for many years, or he would actually find himself under US jurisdiction. So he actually considered taking that deal. Just because of the pressure that was on him. But the other concerning thing was, as part of that deal, they wanted him to testify against a third party, asking him to say that they had committed a crime, that this person had committed a crime, and that Chris had been a witness to it. He told them, I don't know this person. I'm not a witness to any crime. As far as I know, he hasn't done anything. But they didn't care. They wanted him to say that anyway. They wanted him to testify to that.
It's almost like they just wanted to check a box. They just wanted the boxes checked.
They had, and this is the problem with the US DOJ in particular, the FBI in particular. They want a result and they don't care how they get there. They don't even care if it's real. Perhaps they want it for a political reason. Perhaps they want it for a promotion or to hit certain targets. But it's so manipulative, wrong, and unconstitutional, frankly, to coerce a witness into, well, not even a witness, to coerce an individual into becoming a witness for the prosecution when they have not themselves been a witness to a crime. Now, surely that in itself has to be a crime, and the individuals within that department should actually be prosecuted for these unlawful acts. So the way I see that now, I mean, you can see, I mentioned to you just the other day in a telephone call that if you look at, okay, Trump's being indicted, but if you look at all of the other people that they have indicted alongside him or accused of co-conspirator crimes with him, I imagine that by the book, as they did with Chris Ems, they will be intimidating those people who have less opportunity to defend themselves. I mean, we look at Trump, we know that at least he's going to get proper legal representation.
Yeah,
at least
like
he
even Rudy Giuliani, who's famous and had lots and lots of money. He's at a point where he simply is out of money for legal defense.
Absolutely. And I think people in that position, and especially the lower people who might just be household staff or a driver or, someone who just doesn't have that kind of power, they're the ones who the FBI will target, and they will ask them to become a witness in return for a plea deal. Perhaps that plea deal will be a limited sentence, a slap on the wrist, or maybe it will simply be, right, we'll take you off the prosecution altogether, or you'll get good behavior or a fine or something similar. And that to me is a huge problem. And it doesn't matter whether we say it's the Democrats doing it or the Republicans. I'm sure it's been done on both sides, though increasingly we absolutely find it obvious that right now it's the Biden administration, it's the Democrat DOJ system, and it is unfair. However, as a citizen, nobody should support that. Nobody should support coercion of witnesses, falsifying of evidence, weaponizing a DOJ or a Justice Department against an individual for whatever reason. Like, it doesn't even matter what the reason is. It doesn't matter whether you like them or not. As a precedent, nobody should be wanting that to happen, and they should be encouraging the investigation.
So with Chris's case, he was able to go somewhere else. He was able to come to Russia. And were you aware that he was able to, like, when it was happening, or did he kind of like let you know, hey, I'm already here and I'm getting asylum here in Russia, and then you kind of help from there? Or how did that work?
No, I mean, Chris and I were in touch every day during the time he was in Saudi, and we actually had the conversation. We were working with a local MP here in the UK who was really supportive of his case and who found it disgraceful that the United Kingdom was potentially going to surrender sovereignty to the United States, because the UK would have considered the extradition request. So here was the original plan, that Saudi would say no to the extradition and that Chris would return to the United Kingdom, the country of his passport, where he would potentially have the most protection of his own government. And the MP was fully supportive of that. But at the end of the day, it came down to this. Chris had to consider, what will the United Kingdom do when I get there? And of course, the MP was fully supportive. I was fully supportive. Yes, we could have extradition lawyers on standby. But just because the United States lost the extradition request from Saudi, doesn't mean they were going to give up the game. They were just going to jurisdiction shop. They were going to wait for him to arrive in another country. And they probably assumed that would be Dubai, actually. Yes, the UAE. But then they thought perhaps he'll go back to the United Kingdom, at which point I have no doubt whatsoever that the US would have initiated extradition proceedings towards the United Kingdom, and that would have resulted in his either immediate detention, pending an extradition trial, or he would have been unable to leave the country, and that he would have been subjected to extradition proceedings. Now, either one of these scenarios was unacceptable, because those extradition proceedings can last years. There's no guarantee of the outcome, certainly as we can see with Julian Assange and other cases too. The UK tends to nurture its relations with allies, and in most proceedings that they would say, is it a crime in our country as well, yes or no? And the other issue would be, would he be subject to human rights violations in the event that we extradited him? And in this case, although there is clear evidence that he would have likely been subject to human rights violations within that New York penitentiary, I don't think that the United Kingdom would have taken that seriously. I think the US would have been able to persuade them that they would take care of Chris. And there was, even though a very high chance that he would win based on the fact that he is not an American citizen and he should not be subject to US sanctions, there was still a 5% chance, perhaps more, perhaps less. There was still a percentage chance high enough to make him decide, do I really want to put myself through that? I've just been stuck in Saudi for 8 months. I've been in and out of the police detention. I've been thinking that I'm going to potentially spend the rest of my life in a prison in the United States. And we all know how horrible they are. Most people would rather spend time in a Dubai prison than in a New York prison. So he'd faced all of that. He'd hired extradition lawyers in Saudi, spent a fortune on them. He hadn't been able to work when he was in Saudi, so staying in Airbnbs and hotels, and it had been a very, very difficult time for him, a very stressful time. And there is no way that he wanted to go through that again in the United Kingdom. So he said he wanted to go to Russia. It's the only place that he would genuinely be safe from persecution. And this was a case of persecution. He decided, I mean, the US had clearly weaponized the DOJ against him. They'd put him out as #1 most wanted on the FBI list.
No, he's number 3 for counterintelligence. Explain the counterintelligence part. That didn't make sense to me. Like, what does that even mean? Does that mean, because counterintelligence is supposed to mean he was a spy for one country and then a spy for another? What is that? What are they talking about?
Well, that's interesting, because the last time I looked, he was #1 in the technology division, I believe. The cyber division. Yeah.
No, on one of his FBI wanted posters, it says counterintelligence. So,
well, that's interesting. I think they must have put up a new one. And I'd say if they're talking counterintelligence, depending on the date that might be, they might be saying that he's some sort of an intelligence officer for North Korea, or perhaps now Russia. Who knows? It's propaganda. It's absolute propaganda. You can't read a charge sheet. You can't read an indictment, and you can't read an FBI poster without looking at the other side. And, you know, they can be really convincing, can't they? When you actually read one of those indictments and you just read the indictment, it's like reading the prosecutor's opening argument in court. It sounds persuasive until you listen to the other side, until you listen to the defense lawyer.
Well, and I've met Chris, and he is one of the most generous, open, warm people you'll ever meet. He talks very openly about his case. He talks very openly about his business. He's never done anything wrong, you know, and he's just such an honest person and so compassionate to other people. I mean, he didn't even really know me, and he basically offered his hand and even sent groceries to me the first week because I didn't know how to, he taught me how to use the phone to order a cab because it's very complicated here. You can't just hail a cab in Russia. You have to do it with a phone app. He showed me, like, he introduced me to people. He was just so kind. And he's like that to everyone he meets. He's just, I mean, it's not just me. He's like that to everyone. And he and his girlfriend, Sasha, are just the most lovely people. And I'm glad he's building a really beautiful life here. And I'm glad that he achieved asylum. He just recently got it. And we celebrated that. And you were part of that. I mean, you were part of him getting free of the yoke of the US because as you were saying, the DOJ is very weaponized right now against anyone that has something to do that's pushing on their narrative. And in his case, it's crypto, right? Because they want centralized banking. They don't want decentralized. And it's really sad because there's other crypto creators and people involved that are going to prison as well. So you're right. They're picking them off, aren't they?
It's certainly picking them off. And I think someone like Chris, they want to use as a witness against someone else. Like, they're not actually that concerned with him, but I think they were upset that he didn't take their deal in the end. I think they thought they had an easy target and that he would end up being a prime witness for them against other people. But he said to me, he was really tempted, but ethically he felt, I can't be a witness against someone when I know they haven't done the crime. You know, he just couldn't do it. And to his peril, in a situation, in a sense, he knew that in saying no, that, I mean, they were charging him with crimes that could see him in prison for decades, like the rest of his life, essentially. But he refused to give false testimony, false witness. He just absolutely refused. And that meant that he gave up his freedom. So yes, he's in Russia now. Hopefully he will have that back in the future. Hopefully we can tackle it and remove this on the state side. And people will see that this was a weaponized indictment and hopefully remove it. And that's with a lot of people. But in the meantime, he refused to do that because he's a nice guy, because he's a genuine person. He doesn't like to lie and put people behind bars who don't deserve to be there. And so for that, he now lives in Russia and he's definitely making the most of it. And I'm glad that he started a new life and he feels safe.
And he's a young person. He's just barely 30. I mean, like, I'm older, and as you know, and to watch someone really at the beginning of their career, it's really it upsets me a lot that he's basically had this weight on him this young. That's so young. And they're going after, and a lot of the crypto space, there's a lot of just men in their 20s and 30s just starting their careers that are now facing long sentences. There's 20-something-year-olds facing life in prison more than rapists and violent criminals. He's facing life in prison over a website that he operated just about money movement. And he had no ill intention. He had never committed a crime in his life. 22 years old, I think he was when he was imprisoned. And literally the rest of his life, no possibility for parole even, apparently. His family's been really lobbying for him, and I know so has Chris. But it's just happening all the time. And, the people who risked going back to the United States. And I know there are a lot of Americans who say, you know what, if you're wrongfully indicted, if you're wrongfully accused, you have to stand up and fight for yourself within the justice system in America.
and hope that you win. But I'm sorry, if you have the opportunity to avoid that, and if you don't trust the justice system, as nobody should, I mean, how many wrongful convictions in history have we seen, have we uncovered? How many, people have we executed and then found out they're innocent later?
Well,
so we
not
don't
just
have the
that, but
greatest
like
history.
with the Espionage Act, the prosecution rate is 98%. That's why everyone takes a plea deal. That's why Maria Butina, who is not a spy, and if you study her case, and there's that article, the spy who wasn't, it illustrates that she how it lays it out very methodically how she wasn't a spy, but she took a plea deal because she just wanted to go back to Russia. She, after, everything that happened, she was like, look, I'm not a spy, guys. Look, I know nothing. I just was arranging some dinners, some friendship. And she really believed that Russia and America could be friends and allies and cooperation. She had no idea. She was young and had no idea, first of all, how she was being used by someone else, but also that they, an American actually, politician. And, it's horrible. It's horrible how they, and the way they treated her, they put her in solitary. And there was just that article about that young, one of the January 6th protesters, where he was in basically a utility closet or smaller.
I saw that today.
Yeah.
Yes,
I mean, for months in solitary. I mean, what is happening to our country, Radha? It's just to the United States. And is Great Britain the same? I mean, we don't even know what Julian Assange's conditions are in Belmarsh, but I hear Belmarsh is pretty grim. I
mean, I don't think you'd want to be there. I would hope with his kind of profile, he'd be in an okay position, but I don't think so. I mean, look, he's been in prison for this long. He hardly gets access to see his, he can't really speak to media. He hardly gets to see his lawyers. And we're so close to a decision. But what's disappointing is, this went to Priti Patel. She was the Home Secretary at the time, and she could have said no to this extradition proceeding. It would all be done. So he's just such hot potatoes. No one wants to deal with it. I mean, I'm sure that when Trump was in power, that he probably wanted to pardon Assange, but I'd say he just came under so much pressure. Yeah, exactly. He would have come under so much pressure.
It was the walrus dude, Bolton. Reeve, who was the dude that talked him out of it? You know this. It was John Bolton. I think it was Bolton that talked him out of it. But I wanted to now shift a little bit.
They also were part of the plan of setting up an assassination attempt. That was Trump, and I think it was either Bolton or might have even been Bannon at the time.
It was Bolton. It was Bolton. He had Waller's mustache.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to kind of shift the conversation, Radha, to me. I'm just kidding.
I was literally just about to do that, actually.
Yeah.
I was about to bring that home.
Yeah. Okay, bring it home. Go ahead.
All right. What I was going to say is, of course, when we're talking about this weaponization of the DOJ and the Justice Department and the Interpol warrants, as we've already submitted your Interpol check application, which we should hear back on soon. The other thing is, I was going to ask you, I mean, since Snowden and all of the snooping was exposed and the US was under fire for spying on citizens, I don't really see that much has necessarily changed. And even with the legal process that in some cases is going on, whether it's in the like spying on Donald Trump, spying on you, getting indictments so that they can get your private information from Twitter, which I would be surprised if Twitter wouldn't just willingly hand it over, or if the DOJ/FBI didn't already have spy employees within social media companies. I mean, if I were a foreign government, I'd want to have a little spy in each social media company.
Well, what I was told by intelligence, former intelligence officers, is basically, that are whistleblowers, is that basically what they do is a mirror reconstruction. So they already had everything they had about me, but they didn't have it legally.
Right.
They were going with these sealed warrants to get it legally. And then, but that's what we don't know. And indict me with what? I mean, I've heard a lot of things, like people, there's been postings about the fact because I had a Wise app, because I got money from RT, that somehow that would be taken under FARA.
I mean, that's so silly because I mean, I know so many RT journalists. They were working in the United Kingdom for RT.
And they all get paid. Yeah,
absolutely.
Like, so wire fraud, and maybe explain in legal terms to the audience what wire fraud is, but that term got thrown at me as well as some other things.
Wire fraud is just one of those broad stroke cover anything and everything. If there's any kind of financial element, it could just be a transaction, a payment for literally anything. And I mean, it's so broad. It would cover receiving a payment. It would cover receiving a payment and not telling someone, or anything at all. Honestly, you can't even define it. Anything that has a
fabulous. Okay.
Anything that has a financial transaction or element involved.
So basically, when Chris came to you about my case, then I was referred to you, what was your first initial thought when you saw the mess? The tangle? What was your first, like, oh, I'm gonna run? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, firstly, I went and did I spoke to you briefly, didn't I, on WhatsApp, and then I went and did the research, and I saw that you would be the primary target for a campaign, a persecutive campaign of disinformation, harassment, and potentially legal actions against you. And we see this all the time coming from, I mean, I see it coming from the Middle East. If they have a dissident, or they have someone who wants democracy or wants a different style of government there, they will do exactly the same. They will, and I have clients like this. So I put you in this category. So I've had clients who have, shared their political views, which were against the government at the time, or against the government the US wanted to install in that country, for example, in Egypt. So what that country did, they put them on Interpol. They branded them as terrorists, or some sort of criminal. They take a criminal action against them in that country, get a conviction in absentia, put them on Interpol, and then put media articles out there saying that they were involved in hate groups or involved in terrorist activities, anything like that. So they would completely render them as someone you do not want to be friends with. You don't want to get to know them, because if you do, you'll be in that same category as well, and will put you on a terrorist watch list or similar. So that's what happens in the Middle East. And I exactly saw that would be the very similar thing that would happen from the US government against you, no doubt whatsoever. I saw you as Interpol risk. I saw you as wrongful prosecution risk, conviction in absentia, and absolute harassment and disinformation in the media. And when I looked into it further, that's exactly what I saw.
Yeah, it's been pretty stunning. And I felt really, really relieved to talk to you and John Levy, the attorney that also works with us. And the first thing you all did was get my press conference out there a bit, and then also we filed the UN. Which we still don't have an answer to. Like at what point, do they have to answer, or can they just ignore everybody that writes to them?
I got a response for one client who's in prison, and he's been beaten by police and tortured and this kind of thing, and it took them 1 year to reply. So for a case like yours, again, I would say 1 year. I mean, which is just shocking. How can you respect an organization dealing with urgent and imminent human rights issues, often where they're the last course of, any possibility of action, and they take a year to reply? I mean, it's a joke. I can't take them seriously.
If they reply at all. And I'm sure, I don't even know if they're required, right? As far as, my case goes, I'm looking at what's happening to Donald Trump. And if I had stayed, right, like what different things they would have come at me with. I mean, it's like with Donald Trump, it's like that shirt didn't fit. Oh, we'll put this shirt on him. Well, that shirt didn't fit. We'll put this one on him. And it feels like they're prosecutorially shopping. Am I wrong? But that's
they are. Yes, we want something to stick, so we'll just throw as much mud as we can legally in multiple jurisdictions and try to get the most favorable judges and juries possible. We won't give him a change of venue, fair trial. In fact, we'll try to gag order him if we can. I mean, to me, it's a deliberate attempt to render him, incapable of doing anything else, incapable of running for the election, incapable of being effective, to also hurt him and to punish the people who supported him, to punish the people who challenged election integrity, who didn't believe that the elections were honest, and many of them still don't. So I think it's a disgraceful use of resources, and what they should be doing is trying to fix the issues that caused, if they're upset about January 6th, why were people so upset about it? It's not about blaming Trump. Let's look at the core issue. They were concerned, whether or not, that came from Trump saying it, they are still concerned. They were concerned then, and they're still concerned. And what have you done to prove to them that the elections have integrity? What standards have you put in place? I know Senator Rand Paul did a lot of investigations, but has anything come of that? Nothing solid. I don't think anyone's really confident about the upcoming election. So they have just tried to prosecute him. I think when it comes to you as well, if you're in the United States, you would be harassed, intimidated, perhaps even indicted, and then offered a plea deal. So who knows what would happen in your case, but you would absolutely be at risk.
They did not want me testifying and being legitimate. So the only way to do that was to delegitimize me. And of course, the obvious thing to do with that is hang a crime on me if I'm criminally prosecuted. Because remember, before you came into my life, Radha, and Reef remembers this, in 2020, they were going to prosecute me for perjury when I was an expert witness for domestic violence victims. They were literally going to put me in prison for, they were talking numbers of 25 to 30 years for each count.
My God.
I lied about my education. I had to hire an attorney. I didn't have the money for it. Anyway, $15,000 later, which I'm still owe that money out to the person that paid the attorneys for it. That's a lot of money for someone who doesn't have a lot, and to clear my name. And my name did get cleared, but at what cost? And they still, the trolls still bring it up as if it's a real thing, and it's not. I mean, obviously, I didn't lie about my education, and Monterey County DA did not prosecute me or investigate further or anything like that. So it was over. But what an amount of stress. It caused me health issues. I mean, it was very jarring to have that on top of me, simply because I told the truth about Biden. So
see, that's the thing. I mean, if you look at the timeline of what's happened to you, I mean, it's all happened since you came out, since you, spoke about what happened with Biden, and then suddenly you're on the other end of an allegation, an indictment essentially that you have to defend. Most people can't handle that. Can you imagine how much of a deterrent it is for someone who wants to come forward and talk about their own abuse? If they see what happened to you, they see that, okay, they tried to prosecute you. And even then, like, the stigma's still stuck. I heard people bringing it up again, but it was an allegation. It was discharged. They didn't prosecute. They realized that it was a false case against you, and that it was persecuted. But then you suffered even more harassment. They've sent sort of teams, armies of disinformation trolls, essentially, is what you would call them. Not trolls, because it is a paid campaign. That's the worst part.
Very coordinated. They didn't do that with Chris, but I think they would have had he had a higher profile and been more, out there. They probably would have employed the same tactics with him, but it wasn't the same kind of a case.
The thing is with Chris, it doesn't have as much political intrigue. Yours is, it is against the sitting president of the United States. And that has the potential to damage the Democrat Party, has a potential to ruin any possibility of him running in the future. And it is big news. Chris, that's a cryptocurrency issue. It's sort of between him and the FBI. It's less so interesting. It's less interesting for media, and it's less interesting to the Democrat Party.
True. In the Democratic Party, it's amazing how worldwide they're just having so much impact. It's bizarre. And I'm really looking forward to the stranglehold they have on power to be taken away, because I feel like we're almost there. I feel like it's almost getting taken away. And with each horrific event and their response to it and weaponization of you know, the DOJ and FBI, you know, you see closer to reality. But so as far as like, when the other thing I was going to mention that I really appreciated about you and John was that, you know, you haven't, my case is kind of in this limbo phase of trying to figure out what were they charging me with. And that's been a tough one because they're so closed mouth. And you know what, if you could, because, you know, there was my decision whether I should leave Russia or not. And you were part of those conversations right after I was here staying and kind of in that limbo phase. Reeve, could you put up the John Kirby press conference and play that really quick for the audience? Yeah. So John Kirby decided to do actually 2 little press conferences about me. And Reef, if you just Google my name and John Kirby, Russia, it comes right. Yeah. Those 3 keywords. John Kirby, for those who don't know, is part of the NSA. He usually comments on military matters or like, so what really struck me, Radha, about this particular press conference is they didn't trot out Karine, you know, the press secretary. They didn't just have her make a comment because it was allegations of the president. They brought out the head of the NSA, the National Security. So here it is.
TaraReade, who was an aide to then Senator Biden back in the 90s, and then in 2020 accused him of sexual assault. She announced yesterday she's seeking citizenship in Russia and she feels safer there. Does the White House have any reaction to that announcement, given the accusations that she's made against President Biden?
We'd be loath to comment on the musings of a potential Russian citizen. That's really up for her to speak to.
Does the White House believe that her allegations may have been motivated by her allegiance to, affinity for Russia?
Difficult to say. I mean, I can't get inside her head and speak for her motivations and intentions. That's really for her to speak to. The one thing I will say is that the allegations that her life was at risk by the United States government, absolutely false, baseless. There's nothing to that.
Okay. What's your comment on that, Radha?
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, number one, I mean, that takes us back to the fact that you went to Russia is what sort of drove us to this point where he's commenting on this, because they tried to use what was, you know, a short break, a short holiday for you, kind of, you know, promoting your book and arranging your editing and that kind of thing. But because you went to Russia, they thought, what a wonderful opportunity. We can pretend, we can use this in a disinformation campaign to say that Russia, you know, that you're a Russian agent, that you're a spy, that you were always a spy, that from the very beginning you were obviously working for Putin. So, I mean, they circulated that everywhere. You saw the headlines.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's just like any disinformation campaign coming from the government. They circulate it via someone like the New York Times and then use that once it's printed as evidence to go and get all of these court orders to snoop on your personal finances and personal emails.
And you know what, Radha, that's so interesting you said that about the New York Times, because the New York Times actually hadn't said a word about the fact I was about to testify before Congress against Biden. Like, that was announced by a sitting congressman, announced that he was going to bring me in to testify, gave a long Twitter. You saw the tweets by him, several of them.
Yeah.
He even make like page 12 or the sports section, which sometimes for some reason my allegations in the USA Today end up in the sports section. I still don't know why. And so it didn't end up in the New York Times, but then I go to Russia and I'm on the front page. I'm on the front of the New York Times with my horse. And it's right there for everyone to see and all about Russia, but it's nothing about the fact I was about to testify against Joe Biden, against the sitting president. And that the reason I didn't feel safe is because I was being threatened. And then, you know, of course, you know what ensued. So isn't that interesting, that manipulation? And the fact that they had him say, you know this because in real time, I was talking to John when I saw that Kirby thing and I'm like, oh, I'm safe to go home. And he said, yeah, right. You're safe. You know, when John Kirby says you're safe, like that, it's like the total opposite, right?
I mean, he didn't really say you're safe. He said that your life's not at risk.
Oh, that's a good point.
Mm.
Yeah. See, that's your...
Okay, but what does he consider your life? Like you're living or dead? Does he consider your life behind bars, not at risk? He didn't say that. So,
Right.
and that is a huge concern. And I think now I mean, at the time we discussed it, if you are heading back to the US to testify in Congress, as Congressman Gates wanted you to, if you'd gone back there, it was very likely or highly likely that you would have been arrested on arrival, and that they would have used the fact that you just went to Russia to hold you, to detain you. And they would have used their usual disinformation campaigns in the New York Times and every other newspaper in town saying that, oh, you're a Russian agent, and they can pretty much hold you as long as they want. And people would not have very much sympathy for you if they believed those headlines. That's the thing. And that's what puts you at risk. So at this time, it just wasn't safe. It's not going to be safe for a long time, I would say. I mean, with this campaign, with this election, with Biden still in the running, no, it's absolutely not safe.
Yeah, it's not safe for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people are getting travesties of justice, like we mentioned, that January 6th person that was held in solitary, and and then of course Donald Trump with his multiple indictments and the 19 people behind, with him, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and some of the others included in a property manager, as you mentioned. Yes. Yeah, right. I mean, it's stunning, really, how they're trying to get rid of any political opposition, but meanwhile, his numbers still are really strong. Well, you've done a lot.
I think free speech for everyone in America is at complete risk, and that includes you, and that's why we made that United Nations application, because your free speech has been impacted by this harassment, intimidation, weaponization. Basically, they were trying to silence you, and if you weren't going to be silenced, they wanted you in jail. And I think that's what we're seeing with Donald Trump or whomever it is, January 6th protesters. Some of them. There was one that was only in the building for like 12 seconds, wasn't there? So, I mean, we're seeing that as citizens, we want to be able to protest. Doesn't matter what the issue is. We all have the right to protest, to lobby, to try to influence change in our society. And I think whenever we prosecute anyone under those laws, everyone is at risk. Whenever we harass someone at their place of work, whenever we try to get them fired through politically paid actually campaigns against political opponents, aren't they, or people that they consider at risk, a risk to their campaign, very much like you. They pay people to try to cause maximum damage in your life, and nobody should be encouraging that. But I see increasingly this political division causing normal people to, like average normal, voters, American citizens, to encourage that kind of behavior, so long as they don't like the person who that behavior is being targeted at. So I don't like you, okay, but I don't want you to be targeted in this way, because I know at any time that targeting could turn on someone I do like, or it could turn on me. So I think as society, we need to stop looking at that from a personal preference point of view. We need to look at it at what are our rights, and we need to apply those rights to everyone. And we need to make sure that, there's equal enforcement of the law, that there's fair enforcement of the law, and that it's not ever being politically motivated. But that's so difficult in the US. I mean, you have it's a completely different system, obviously, to the United Kingdom. But as much as we can as people, we should support everyone's right to freedom of expression, to freedom of speech, to speaking up. If someone like yourself makes allegations against the president, they should be heard, they should be respected, and that investigation should take place. And that's really all you wanted. You wanted your testimony in Congress. You wanted that investigation because they are serious allegations and they are against the president of the United States. And that should be taken seriously, just like everyone else's allegations, whether it's regarding sexual assault, whether it's regarding some other form of abuse of power, abuse of process, or just general abuse. And I think that's what's most upsetting, is we're being silenced. People are being silenced. Citizens are being silenced. Whatever spectrum, whatever side they're on, they're not being heard. And it's frustrating. And it is, what's happening? Is it going to change? What can be done? And I think, we're even seeing RFK being largely censored, aren't we, for his views on, his alleged views on the vaccines that turned out not even to be true. And then you have
it's amazing. Yeah, it really is. And Reef, I wanted you because Radha, we get chats. We have a chat going, and so people are making comments and asking questions and doing whatever. So Reef, do you have any questions or comments from the chats?
Yeah, I know our audience is usually big Assange supporters, and recently there's been new news in regards to what's happening in that case that you might be able to speak to. Carolyn Kennedy says U.S. open to Assange plea deal. I think the newspaper said something along the lines of, what was it? I wanted to get the wording specifically because it was a David Hicks style plea bargain, if you're aware of that case and how that went. If you could speak to what Assange might do in this case, in this so-called Alford plea deal, and how that might operate.
And really, like, why does he have to do a plea deal? Because he didn't do anything wrong. But Rod, I'll let you speak to this.
Well, I mean, my issue would be with a plea deal. Okay, David Hicks, Australia violated his rights, but okay, Guantanamo inmate. I would say, look, if he accepts a plea deal, will he have to go to America to enter that plea? Or is he going to be able to do it from the safety of the United Kingdom with the promise that they will drop the extradition request and let him be sentenced in his absentia and then transferred to Australia? That is a deal that is worth taking. America gets their stupid little win and he gets to go back to Australia. But if that plea bargain involves him touching down on US soil, then he's at risk because the US could change their mind. And regardless of any assurances they make when they get him, they might say, oh, but this new information came up. We didn't know about that before. So there's absolutely room for them to maneuver. And I don't think Assange's team would feel confident with him to do it in that way. But certainly I would potentially accept a plea deal if I were representing him, so long as that involved him being convicted in absentia, sentenced in absentia, and transferred to Australia out of prison immediately. So that could be a way where they could save face, even though I don't really support him entering a plea deal. At this point, if it's going to achieve the end result, which is his freedom and his ability to continue with his life, which has largely been ruined by this campaign against him. So that's what I would suggest.
Interesting.
Great.
Interesting.
Do you feel like there's any precedent that can be set by him accepting a lesser charge, pleading guilty to that, even though he gets to say he's innocent? It still means legally,
I think there's no precedent there, because if it's a guilty plea, then it doesn't go to court, so it doesn't set any real precedent. Anyone could challenge that in the future, so I don't think we'd be at risk of that. I do think it's nasty, though, that he wouldn't be able to campaign further, but I don't imagine that he will ever be quiet. I think even after this, maybe they can lobby different think tanks, different groups to change or to legislate those protections into law. But I think at this point, a plea deal is definitely worth it. It wouldn't set a precedent, but it looks bad. It does look bad in that they might see that as a win themselves. Well, the punishment for Julian Assange was not the plea deal where, let's say, he gets a suspended sentence or similar. The punishment was the process. He's been detained, he's been locked up, he's lost years of his life, his mental health is suffering, his family, his children. So that they will think that that's kind of punishment enough, and perhaps enough of a deterrent for people in the future to speak out about US government wrongdoing.
Yeah, it's really chilling. It's really having a chilling effect. Whistleblowers for sure. Any more questions or comments, Reeve? Okay. Words of support, that's good. Words of support are good. And so, just kind of to move on from my case, we're waiting for a lot of information to come, the Interpol notices. We're waiting to find out. So there was a recent inquiry to Elon Musk.
Yes.
Because he's trying to do some things because it was the Twitter before he owned it, to figure out, what happened. So maybe he'll answer, maybe he won't.
What we were trying to do with that is we suspect that there was involvement from the Justice Department with Twitter on Tara Reade's case in particular, and that means that they were maybe colluding with Twitter before Elon Musk took over to intimidate Tara, because they were the only social media outlet that actually wrote to Tara and said, hi, we've received this indictment and we're going to hand over all of your personal information. No one else.
They did more than that. They went to court and I guess tried to fight it. And one of the pitches that guy gave was, hey, we spent thousands of dollars just to tell you that we have a sealed warrant. So
it just seems strange considering the collusion that has been exposed over the past year or so. The collusion between Twitter and the Biden administration has been so well laid out and evidenced that it would be strange if they weren't colluding on this.
True. And I know that attorney also said that it wasn't just Twitter, that literally every single app that I'd ever used, my email, everything was under sealed warrants. So, and then would say nothing more than that. And he said, I said, so you said everything got taken? And he said, I would consider everything. And I'm like, okay. And that's all you could say. So, or so he said. But the legal firm, Perkins Coie, and that particular attorney had worked with Hillary Clinton years ago, or had represented her or been some involved with her. Now, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, the Clintons have tons and tons of lawyers, but I just thought it was an odd coincidence that particular lawyer had been involved with her.
It certainly is. And nothing has been heard of that indictment since.
Nope.
We don't know whether there's charges against you. And that could have been the sole purpose of it, is to inform you that this was happening, so that you would feel frightened and intimidated, and you would end up silenced. And it worked for how long? 6 months, I think it was it? Where you felt...
a few months, but I mean, I definitely still feel worried about it now, because it's just like a spider. There was a grand jury impaneled. So it's just sitting there. Like it never goes away. I thought it went away, but no, it doesn't. And you had mentioned, and we had discussed how Julian Assange had an indictment similar, a sealed one, for 10 years. And then they all of a sudden acted on it 10 years later. That mine's only 4 years old. 3 years
I mean, they asked for personal information. They asked to know where you get paid, what kind of money goes into your bank account. They wanted your private messages, all of your, search history, just everything. And the question is, would that have happened if you hadn't said something about Biden? No, absolutely not. Was there any evidence or suspicion that you could have, committed some crime because you said something against Biden? No. So that is a total example of weaponization, and it would be good to see, as this information gets revealed to us, it would be good to see exactly the route they took when organizing this campaign against you.
Yeah, it would be interesting. And you have other cases. I mean, you have really compelling cases. Do you want to talk about any of the other ones, or are you able to talk about any of the ones you have right now that are prominent? Or you can't, because there was one, I was an influencer.
I mean, I can.
Okay.
I mean, yes. Look, what I saw with that, and I was quite impressed actually with the assistance that we got. I mean, this was just a tourist case. So this is a young social media influencer who traveled to Dubai and got into an argument with a rental car agency, and he falsely accused her of slander and defamation and shouting at him, basically to extort her. Take a criminal case, scare her, demand $10,000. What I thought was interesting with this one is she was in Texas, living in Texas. So Ted Cruz and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee got involved, and they were really effective, really supportive. And we don't see this enough with our representatives. We certainly don't see it very often with our own embassies. And usually the US embassy will do nothing to assist someone, but where there is a political representative who's willing to stand up for those issues or for that individual, and they put pressure on the embassy, then suddenly they can resolve things very quickly. They can actually use the power of the US government. So it was nice to see that. A lot of tourist cases. Just in the past week, I've received really good news that we deleted 2 Qatar Interpol red notices, and just silly issues, again, bounce checks, business debt, debt that someone didn't even owe. So again, Qatar is one of those countries that really abuse the Interpol red notice system. But it's really difficult to criticize, because although they're ostensible in their use of it, like they ostensibly abuse it, and then other countries like the United States abuse it too. And that's why they've been given this, international crime reporting organization has been given sovereign immunity in the United States. So even when they abuse people, even when they ruin people's lives or cause them to be arrested abroad, you can't even sue them in the United States. And many people have tried. And it just seems wrong that any country would give Interpol immunity unless there is some sort of agreement to compensate people, for example, if they've been clearly abused, they've been, God knows how much they might have suffered. They could have been jailed, they could have lost their business, their work, everything. And okay, it's found to be an abusive notice. They should at least have some sort of organized compensation scheme, like they do for victims of vaccines, for example.
So there are countries that actually use the red notices, kind of to extort money or to do some shady stuff, including the US, I'm sure. But like, what are some of the other countries that you've seen that are kind of getting into that role, doing that?
I mean, you've got a few categories. There's, politically motivated Interpol red notices. There are countries that don't really have enough evidence to convict someone of a crime, but want to bring them back to the country as part of their investigation. So they put them on Interpol, or convict them without the evidence first and put them on Interpol just to bring them back to question them. And even I've seen the United Kingdom do that with a number of people. They've cast a really huge net over certain investigations that they're conducting in the UK. And rather than just getting the 2 people who they've actually got evidence against, they put Interpol red warrants over, maybe 20 or 30 of them just to try and bring them back for questioning. So that's a real concern. Then we have countries, banks, private entities, just putting people on Interpol, waiting for them to get caught, and then saying, okay, can you pay off your credit card debt now? And we'll take off the Interpol red notice. And many times that money isn't even owed. They've made a clerical error, or they've added so much interest, or deliberately inflated the price just to make it meet Interpol's threshold for minimum reporting requirements. And I mean, with one case, I don't know whether you remember, Brian Glendinning, a Scottish man, he was arrested in Iraq. He was working over there, and he was detained there for months pending an extradition to Qatar. And the bank simply said, give us money and we'll withdraw the notice, and then Iraq will let you go. So, I mean, that was insane. But I mean, we deal with this all the time. South Korea, all sorts of places. So it's prevalent. No country wants to change the regulation regarding sovereign immunity. They don't want them to be sued. They want to continue using them because they want to be able to export their jurisdiction in cooperation with their allies.
I see. Well, good explanation. It's been a fascinating discussion with you. Your work is amazing, and you're helping so many people. How can people find you and follow your work?
Okay. Well, I'm on Twitter at Radha Sterling, Radha, Sterling, Stirling, radhasterling.com, detainedindubai.org for Dubai issues, and dueprocess.international for worldwide.
Well, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you've made my life better, and you've made so many other people's life better. And the work you did for Chris Ems as well. I mean, he talks effusively about how grateful he is to you. I'm grateful to both you and John Levy. And I just want to say, you've given so much of your time and your energy to those of us that had no one, and were kind of just left abandoned with very confusing. I have a law degree, but this is out of my realm, and it's very confusing, and it's very frightening, particularly when you're in a foreign country and all of this is going down. So you've been a lifeline.
Oh, no, it's been my absolute pleasure, and I've loved exploring what we can do here, trying to get your testimony in. And we have discussed what we have in plan for next year on your testimony, and I really hope that people hear it. I hope that people investigate it, and they say nobody should be silenced anymore, whether it's you, whether it's RFK, whether it's Donald Trump, Fauci, whatever. There's so much silencing going on at the moment. And we need to, as a community, I think, as citizens, start listening to more obscure media. Stop reading, the New York Times, the BBC, and this and that. You have to read everything, the mainstream media, and you have to search for alternative media now. I mean, you saw Tucker Carlson. Okay, you can look at him on Twitter. You can, see your favorite people. And I think just getting a variety of educational resources is the only way forward. Otherwise, we're going to all end up stupid on both sides of the spectrum as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, and you're absolutely right on. In fact, I'm on Indie News Network, so INN, follow us here. Reef has a show on Wednesdays. And Reef, you were just on the Misty Winston show. She's on TNT Radio. You can put that up there.
Yes, I was.
Yeah, how'd that go? That was fun.
Great.
Fun stuff.
Misty makes it super easy. She had George Galloway on recently as well. Fee, and I think Jimmy Dore was on recently too. So you can go to TNT Radio /show/Misty Winston show to find it, I think. But yeah. You're also on there too, I think.
Yes, I have a show. Chris was doing it with me, but he got busy with work because he has a real job. And I do media stuff, but he's got his 9-to-5er, so he's busy. But you can find my show every day at 9 a.m. on Eastern time, 6 a.m. Pacific if you want to get up early. And then, of course, you can watch the replays. So I'm on TNT now. And you can also find Politics of Survival every Friday. We have a different guest, and I really appreciate Radha Sterling giving so much of her time and energy this evening. All of you that joined and are watching and contributing to the super chats, thank you so much. It means so much to us when you do that and talking to us and giving us your feedback on YouTube and the different venues. You may also know YouTube demonetized me, so that's okay. You can support the show in other ways. Just check out TaraReadePodcast.com. It'll lead you to all the links. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Reef. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Radha, so much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time, next Friday, everyone. Good night.